Many of us think of laughter as great medicine. But what about laughter as a source of deep insight about consumer behavior and human nature? My guest, Rajiv Satyal, takes the concept of funny because it's true and turns it into a hilariously powerful approach to learn about what resonates with people. Rajiv learned to blend what he learned as a marketer at Procter Gamble with the skills he has honed as a professional comedian for nearly 2 decades. In this episode, Rajiv and I talk about what he learned working at Procter Gamble, the difference between being a perfectionist and an excellentist, his journey going pro as a stand-up comedian, observations on creative process and making comedy accessible for audiences, the difference in mindset between getting laughs and giving laughs, his disagreement with Yoda, transforming failure into gold, his approach to applying funny because it's true with brand and marketing teams, and how we can make work more enjoyable and meaningful. Let's dive in. Rajiv, welcome to Making Business Art. I'm so delighted you are joining me today.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Rajiv, so we're going to talk about your background. We're going to talk about some reflections about your creative process and reflections about making business art, which is what this project is about. But before we jump into that, I just like to connect with my guests as people. And I'd like to just open up a conversation by asking you, what makes you laugh?
What makes me laugh? Well, I make me laugh. I think I'm pretty funny. So a lot of actors can't watch their own stuff because they feel like maybe it's egotistical or whatever it is. But I watch my own comedy videos. Like, that was pretty funny. That was a good one. I do actually feel like I'm blessed by having that inner voice in my head that does make me laugh. And it's been a solace for me for a long time. There are two things in this world I cannot do. I can't draw. I can't sing. My brother is very good at both of those things. And he said he's gay. He had his own personal journey. And he said he spent a lot of time in his room singing, and his voice was his companion. And I feel like that voice in my head as a comedian is my companion a lot of the time. That said, I am an easy laugh. Most comics, it's hard to make us laugh, but I laugh pretty easily at a wide variety of things.
Yeah. Well, who do you find funny these days outside of yourself?
Besides me, I know my own self-plug. You're like, hey, we're going to do that at the end. So the man who got slapped by a man who sang about Miami, Will Smith sang a song called Miami, and he slapped a man called Chris Rock. Chris Rock has always been my number one favorite comedian for decades. He still cracks me up. I think Dave Chappelle is hilarious. Bill Burr is someone else I think is very funny. And to round out my Mount Rushmore of stand-up comedians, even though I'm going to get canceled for saying it, Louis C.K. still makes me laugh really hard. So in terms of stand-up comedy, I would say those are the people that I considered, for me personally, have made me laugh the hardest over the many years.
Great. I share those same comedians. For me, Rock is like number one. Rock is just genius. Just pure genius.
So glad to hear it.
And the other thing I noticed in just preparing for this interview is I watched your interview with Hassan Minhaj and then learned that you two were roommates back in the day. So I'm just wondering if you have either a fun memory or funny story from back then.
What's amazing about being roommates with Hassan Minhaj is just watching his development over time. I think that was really it. He would come in and just rant about everything all of the time. And he already had his voice down. He described himself on my podcast a long time ago as an angry optimist. And I think it's so key to discover when you find something that really sums you up like that. And he's really played upon that and turned that into something really big for himself. And just watching a stand-up comedy at the time, he knew it too, where it was okay. You're watching it going, he's spending a lot of time talking about things that I don't think are important to him. And I think a lot of us go through that. And I think to a large extent, I'm still like that. But watching him infuse that in his stand-up comedy and taking the same kind of passion that he would rant around about the apartment and seeing him personally and professionally and how that informed his work, that was something to which I had a front row seat. Of one of the most prominent, outspoken people of our, maybe not my generation, I'm a little older than he is, but I think that's super cool. That's something most people will never get to experience. I don't think that occurred to me until you asked the question. So thank you, Ezekiel.
Okay. All right. So now let's jump into it. This is the question that I open with all my guests, and that is, where do you work and what do you get paid to do?
I work at Funny Indian Inc. That is my own S corporation out here in Los Angeles, California. And I make my money almost entirely by doing stand-up comedy.
Wow. That's impressive. So now we're going to jump into the time machine, go way back. And one of the things I learned about you is that you studied chemical and materials in engineering, like a good Indian. At least all my Indian friends are engineers of some kind. But then you went to work for Procter and Gamble. But before you did all of that, I think I heard that you got paid $75 in high school to entertain some friends. Can you give me a brief history of your comedic side before you went pro? Like, were you already entertaining people as a kid, or how did that flower and evolve?
You've certainly done your research. I think there may be one fly in the ointment. So I got $75 the very first time I performed stand-up comedy. My friend was graduating high school. And so I was already doing stand-up on the side at Procter Gamble. I'm going to imagine that if he's 18 and I'm 22, this must have been in 98. I had just started doing stand-up comedy for the first time at Go Bananas Comedy Club in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so that was the first time for which I got paid to do stand-up, and it went from there. I have long subscribed to the Jay-Z model, even before I knew it was Jay-Z. He never performed for free, ever. He, from the beginning, from the jump, from the get-go, he charged, even if it was $50 or $75, and now look where he is. So look, there's the prevailing or the countervailing, I guess, point of view, which is like, just get yourself out there, just get as much exposure as you can. The big E word for all entertainers besides entertainment is exposure. And but people can beat you over the head with that. And I think for me, it's been better to be fair and equitable and just set a price and then say, look, hey, this is my pricing. This is my rate card. And by the way, I've talked people down too. I've had people wanting to pay me too much for a private gig. And I said, you know what? I don't feel right taking that much either. So I think that if you have integrity in your rate card, that shows in the things that you do. And I don't think my wife likes that second part where I talk myself out of money, but hey, that's okay. Yeah,
that probably
maybe not the best move, but sometimes you got to do it. But I was entertaining people in high school and college. I wasn't getting paid yet to do it. Maybe in beer.
In beer. Okay. Well, then it's still an exchange. Everything counts. And so we opened with this, but I'm wondering, like, back then, were there comedians that you looked up to and studied early on as masters of the craft?
I had listened to only, I think, 4 or 5 albums or specials all the way through. And you can't say Bill Cosby himself anymore, but, for the younger folks out there who have no idea who Bill Cosby was, and I'm still relatively young to appreciate all that he did, it's a real tragedy because the man is a monster. And it's so sad to learn that, because what he did and what he achieved, not just for the Black community, but also to entertain so many people the way he did, it's a shock to this day. But I did listen. It was the very first time I had ever seen stand-up comedy. Is Bill Cosby himself, Eddie Murphy Raw, Dennis Leary, No Cure for Cancer, Dennis Miller, The Off-White Album, Stephen Wright, I Have a Pony. I think those are the ones where I had seen before I ever did stand-up. And then we talked about Chris Rock, and then that was a little bit later on. But those might have been it. Might have been Bring the Pain. Those are the 5 or 6 that I had seen or heard. And that's a pretty broad swath from Dennis Leary to Chris Rock to Stephen Wright. And so I feel like I had pretty good exposure to the art form, but I had never considered doing it while I was listening to these.
Interesting. Well, was there anyone later on? So was Chris Rock somebody that you studied, like, for, like, what's he doing? How's he landing jokes or delivering? Was there anybody else?
I would say Chris Rock for sure. And I think probably he more than anyone else, because I say this usually I say this in a bad way about performers, but I say this in a good way with him. You can see the lines. You could see the structure because he's so funny on the page. And then he's also funny in his performance style. And his sets have always he opens with politics, and then he does race, and then he does sex. And it's pretty much a trimester approach every single hour that he does. And he has such a very defined way of going at these things until he did Tambourine, where he talked about getting divorced and all those things a few years ago. And that felt like a very different kind of Chris Rock at a different speed, almost like a pitcher was throwing a curveball or a breaking ball instead of a fastball. And I did study him. I did watch Chris Rock, I would say, more than anyone else, because I feel like you can learn from him. Whereas someone like Dave Chappelle is so much of a genius that you can't really learn a lot watching Dave Chappelle. I think he's on a level that is so far removed from anyone else.
Yeah. All right. So let's fast forward to your years at Procter and Gamble, right? Or how do you say Punjabis and Gujaratis?
Somebody's done his research.
So what attracted you to that career path at the time? And what did you do there?
Well, I had already, let's see, this was senior year in college, and I was earning this degree in materials engineering, focusing on semiconductors. I was going to be a wafer fabrication engineer out in the Silicon Valley, which now is 6 hours north of where I live. Not at the time. I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, my hometown. And then I got a call from Procter Gamble, or got an email rather, and a chance to apply. And growing up in Cincinnati, the world headquarters of Procter Gamble, it's the dream call, right? And so many people around you, it's just the water in which you swim. People go, you'd be a fool not to take that job. And even though it was in purchasing, it was very different from engineering. I knew it would be a good opportunity. And I later moved into marketing, brand management, and I worked there for 6 years. I worked in media and marketing also. It was a tremendous 6 years. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. People go, do you wish you would have come out earlier? And I go, you know what? I think you always have the sense that you could have come out to LA earlier, but you could have come out later too. And now you have the 401k and the IRA, and those are nice to have.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Well, I'm also curious, like, what lessons did you learn there that possibly served you after you left, or even still serve you now?
Even though it's a different kind of writing, you really learn to write at P&G, at the Page, as I call it, because at the Page, everything is written. It's a writing culture. And the reason they do that is because it shows that you've thought it out. Right. And I've learned this over time. Somebody had once said something to me about find out whether your manager is a reader first, or a listener first, because some people like to talk about the idea first and then you capture an email. Other people like you to send them something that they can read first and then they want to talk about it. And so many miscommunications could be saved that way. If you just find out, just ask the person, like, what's better? Do you like to just chop it up first, or do you want me to like pen some thoughts down? And I think things like that are super helpful, because at P&G, you just really learn how to communicate. And that's what you're doing on stage. You're communicating with an audience. It is a monologue, but it's also a dialogue. And you are reacting to what the audience is doing. So even though the writing was more technical or analytical, certainly, or strategic, it was one of those three, or all of those three sometimes. It wasn't creative. It still helps you with your style. I remember I had written this document and I wrote it as a Q&A. And I wrote the questions really funny and the answers really serious. And I showed it to, she was the head of the Walmart team. So it was a big position she had. And I remember she said to me, Elva Lewis, she goes, this is great. What you've written is great. I love it. It will not work here. She goes, you have to put it in the 1-page memo format for people to digest it. She goes, it's too bad because what you've written is actually very clear, but you're going to have to get it into this format. And I love that on the one hand, because there was a rubric and I was an engineer. So there's a formula of what to do, but I didn't like it on the other hand, because I'm like, open your mind, people. If it communicates it well, it should work. And those are it wasn't her fault. It was the company's culture where you kind of go, I can't really spread my wings here and be exactly who I am. I can't bring my whole self to work. And I think that was one of the inflection points for me to go, I'm just, the way I think is just always going to be a little askew from the way that this company thinks.
Yeah. Well, this project is making business art. So following on to that, I'm curious, if you look back, do you have any observations about the ways that you felt both at times enabled in that culture and times that you were stifled in that culture? I mean, you just cited an example, but so feeling enabled, feeling stifled at the culture, what comes up for you? What memories are there?
Enabled, I think, in the sense that they always said that you were contributing from day one. And I do feel that. I do feel like they gave you quite a bit of responsibility. Of course, you would have to check in with your manager before you made a massive decision or something like that. But again, as long as you're well thought out, I felt like my ideas did get in, whether it was in purchasing or in marketing. I didn't feel stifled in terms of my ideas. Of course, you're a cog in a wheel. And of course you are, because even the CEO is in a situation where there's a board of directors, and the CEO can't just do whatever they want. In fact, a lot of times I feel like you're more restricted the higher up you go. But I would say that I did feel enabled and empowered to speak, to communicate. There were a lot of affinity groups for whether you were Asian, or at the time, as I said, African-American or Hispanic. Now you say Latino and Black, and the terms have changed. But those affinity groups, I think, really did help. Times where I felt stifled, I think it's political, conservative, and bureaucratic, like most large organizations are. And it's difficult to describe, but that's what bureaucracy is. Kumail Nanjiani, the actor and comedian, was on my podcast a long time ago. And he said, well, that's why bureaucracy is evil. He goes, to go very dark, he said, this is why, like in executions, or when you have the Nazis, I didn't really do anything. I just drove the train. Well, I didn't really do anything. I just I was the guy who just like fired the thing, but I didn't really kill anyone. And it's there so that the responsibility is placed amongst so many different people that no one really knew what anyone did. And the idea was to remove the accountability. It isn't to increase accountability, it's to remove it. And so what ends up happening is you're in this constant stream of stuff that's coming down your path all the time. Your inbox always seems to be full. Your voicemail box always seems to be full. And there are those days, and I'd say maybe even hours, where you feel like you're like this. You're on top of your keyboard and you're on it. You're going downhill and you're skiing and you feel really good. And I've got control. And like the song says, I can see all obstacles in my way. I kind of got this. But I would say 80% of the time I felt like I was on my back. And I just felt like, how am I going to get through all this? It's 4 p.m. and I just got done with my meetings. I haven't even done any work today. I've just been in meetings all day. And there's so many boxes you have to check. There's so many alignments you have to do. And there's so many things that when you leave and you become an entrepreneur, you go, oh, you mean I can just go do that? And you're so focused on just getting a check. And I know we'll talk more about this and I don't want to get ahead of the conversation, but you are so strapped in doing so many different things. And as an engineer and as someone who's pretty OCD, I always felt like I had to do all the emails. And I know that you're supposed to go 80 for 20 and the Pareto rule and all those things. But if you are not a perfectionist, but even an excellentist, 80 for 20 is just, that's a C, man. I need to get at least a 95. And as a Desi, as an Indian, as an engineer, I think that it was very hard for me to prioritize the person or the project because I felt bad about not getting back to this person or not following up on that project. And you just can't do that. There's no room to feel bad. You have to prioritize and you have to do those 2 or 3 things that are going to get you that promotion. And I never really totally felt great about that.
So I've never heard this excellentist versus perfectionist. Like what? Wait, what's the difference? Isn't it the same thing?
Well, a perfectionist is 100, right? Where they're not really satisfied until you, and I gave that up when I was 18. I was like, okay, you know what? Like, because I was a perfectionist throughout high school. And sometimes it's good enough is good enough. And don't make perfect the enemy of good. And an excellentist is like, if you're a perfectionist, you're getting 100. But, you know, an excellent grade, a 96 is still an excellent grade. I think if most kids could get like 95s, 96s throughout all their classes, I think even Indian parents are going to be pretty happy with that. They might joke about where do those 4 points go, but you're getting into Harvard Med School if you're consistently pulling those kind of numbers. So I think being an excellentist is much better for you effectively and efficiently in the long run.
I'm going to use that. I'm not being a perfectionist right now, just being an excellentist.
I'm
That's
glad.
awesome. All right. So thank you for sharing that. That was just very thoughtful response, like really interesting. So hold on, I'm getting lost here in my notes. So you're at P&G for a number of years, and before that, you had worked in like an Air Force base doing some research, doing material stuff, and then JJ Johnson, et cetera, P&G. And then I think around 2006, right, you took the big leap into the funny land, right, into being a comedian. So tell me about transitioning into life just going pro as a comedian, and how was that like?
It was very scary. I mean, when people say to me today, and that's the biggest question I get still is like, what was that leap like? Because I wasn't a copy repairman. I wasn't doing aluminum siding. I wasn't selling Amway. I wasn't selling real estate. I had a real career, and I didn't really consider it to be that big of a deal that I gave it up. But over the years, over the 16 years of people asking me this question so many times, I've realized that's like not only a big deal, but also like my story, almost more than any of my other stories. So the day that I moved out here, I had 2 large suitcases. I flew from CVG to LAX, Cincinnati to Los Angeles. And I remember I was in corporate housing. I didn't quite have the balls to leave entirely, right? I still came out here and got a job. So it's not like I packed up and came to LA to start performing at the Comedy Store that night. I got a job at Fiji Water as a brand manager, and I lasted for 12 weeks, which now sounds like an internship. That's 3 months. That's a summer. It's so soon. It was a summer. I started probably maybe around this time. And then I went from there. And I started doing comedy on the side, or continued doing it on the side while I was here. But the day that I left Fiji Water on the 25th of August, 2006, it was really scary. I mean, My parents, the first 48 hours, they came around pretty quickly in retrospect, but they were just flipping out. And I was in tears. I was like, what am I going to do? And I just had a feeling, though, that I didn't feel like God sends you all the way out here and puts you in this position to not try it. It seems very strange to come all the way out here, uproot your life, fail at this job, and then go all the way back home. What's the lesson in that? It felt like the lesson was to go forward.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask you, and you already brought it up. It's like, what resistance did you encounter from the people around you? Like, you just acknowledge your parents kind of flipped out there for a minute. Can you unpack that a little bit more, and how do you deal with it? And we're going to come back to that later. This is why I'm bringing it up.
Look, I think the hardest thing for me to take was when I was sitting in a car and I was with my brothers. They are fraternal twins, Rakesh and Vikas. They live in New York City, and they're 4.5 years younger than I. So they are younger. And I must have been 30, or because that's when I moved out here, was 30. And they were 26. And I remember saying that I think I'm going to go into this full time. And it was just met with silence. It was that uncomfortable silence of, wow, okay. And that's almost worse than any words anybody could say, because it's a very palpable, very real reaction that somebody's giving you. It's like a laugh. It's like laughter, right? Where people laugh. A lot of it's involuntary, and it hurt a lot. But it also, then we had an honest conversation about it too. They were just like, wow, that is a really, do you feel like you're ready for that? Do you think you can do it? And they are very fair questions from people who love you, right? They're not asking to be a-holes. They're asking because they are concerned about you. And that's the same thing from your parents. They're concerned. It's not that they hate you or they're mad at you or anything like that. They might be a little mad at you, but I think it's probably that you might be making a massive mistake. And I don't know how it is in broader communities or other communities, but I know in the South Asian community, the Desi community, as we say, Desi, DESI, the Indian community, there's this idea of being on a track. Like, you have to be on a track all the time, right? It's just like there's high school, then there's college, and there's med school, and that's all there is. There's no law school or business school, just med school, and even engineering. That's the highest form of failure is engineering. And so, but all the rest of it is just like that's the track, and then you go, you get your internship and your fellowship and your all those things, and everybody else is doing that. And if you're not doing that, it wasn't enough even to do it in 8 years. There's a 7-year program. And by the way, there's also a 6-year medical program. And that pressure is there. It's for sure there. And as you get older, you get to this point. I have friends now who are doctors who are pretty wealthy, and they can do a lot of things because they have a lot of money. And you have to remind yourself of it's, first of all, we're, knock on wood, we're doing pretty well. But also it's just, you think about the last 16 years, what you've been able to do. And how much people say, well, you don't look like you're 46. I go, that's probably because I've worked hard, but I've been doing the things I want to do, which is probably why I look more like 40, where some of my friends who are 46 look like they're 52.
When I first started making Indian friends, I moved to Washington, D.C. I used to live in South Florida many years ago, moved to Washington, D.C. and started to meet these like just really lovely Indian guys. It was mostly guys, all overeducated, right? Some guy had like 2 PhDs. I was like, how on earth do you even, like, what? And I remember asking one of them who had studied engineering and the type of engineering where I was asking him what type of engineer he was. And he said, have you ever seen those control panels where like they launch spaceships? And I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I designed those.
Wow.
And I asked him, because I'm very curious. It's like, oh, so what attracted you to engineering? And he said, like, well, I didn't want to study medicine. And I was like, that was the only other choice.
That is hilarious. It's like in Coming to America, a land so vast, a country so big. Where should we go? Los Angeles or New York? It's the only 2 choices for most people.
And then I started to notice the pattern, right? I was like, huh. So when I was looking at your background, you started off like chemical and materials, studying that in undergrad. And now you're a comedian. So I'm like, so I just thought to myself, I was like, the story with the parents must have like a dramatic bit there that had to be overcome in that journey.
It was. So, It was. That's very insightful.
Yeah, but I think it's great to see just different representation in creative fields, especially in comedy. So like Aziz and Hassan, and
Mhm.
now I wasn't aware of you until recently,
Mhm.
until a friend introduced us. So I think it's just wonderful to see just representation and variety across all fields.
It's exciting to be part of that. And I think that is palpable. I think we're aware of that because we hear it a lot from people. And also
Mm,
you're just like, yeah, there's a wave. When the story is written, the pioneers, you'll be part of that story. It's just, whoa, yeah, you were one of the first to dip your toes in the water. And that's something that's
yeah,
definitely it's you're aware of that, or at least I am.
yeah. So when you were out in LA, I'm just curious, was there like one or two gigs that were particularly meaningful for you when you were just like starting out in as full-time comedian?
I'd say the two that come to mind, well, probably three. One is the very first time I got paid out here. I performed for the LAPD. That was really
Wow.
interesting. I got that
Wow.
at the Commerce Casino, and there were about
Mhm.
50 cops, and it went really well. I had a good set. And that was the first paid gig. I think it was $50. So I don't know what happened to the 75, and that
Okay.
went down to 50, and the inflation
Mm.
and higher economy of scale and everything, and I lost out on that one. But that was fun. And that kind of was like, okay, I could stand in front of a crowd that's pretty different from me and do this. That was one that came to mind. There was another one for an organization called AIF. It was the American India Foundation. And
Mm.
I think there were about 500 people there. But for years, like for years, 10 to 12 years after that, people would come up to me and be like, you know where I saw you? I saw you at that one gig. And it was just so funny
Oh,
about how,
wow.
like, that's the power of influencers or movers and shakers in one room, and getting in those rooms where it's just this big bang of people that just like for years were like, oh, I saw you at that event. Or people come like, I saw you somewhere. I go, was it AIF? And they go, yes, it was AIF. And then I think the one that was probably the most meaningful was at the Hollywood Laugh Factory, because, and
Mm.
even before that, I performed at a place called The Gig on Melrose. And it was the very first public gig I did here. And my name was on the marquee. It was a small place, but it was spelled wrong. They left the Y out in Satyal. So I'm like, is this what I'm destined to be? Like, my name will be in lights, but it'll be spelled wrong. But there it was, like
Mhm.
on a random Tuesday or whatever it was. And I was a headliner, and that gig didn't really go particularly well, to be honest. I do remember that was kind of painful. But I was at the Hollywood Laugh Factory, and I talked to Jay Davis. He ran the Tuesday 10 p.m. show, which was the hottest show at the time. And
Mhm.
I asked him if I could open the show, and he gave me 5 minutes, and I killed. I just absolutely killed. And then I didn't perform in a comedy club for a while, like many weeks. And the legend kind of grew, like Jerry Seinfeld in The Race, where I choose not to run. And people just assumed he was really fast. And I had this really good set, and
Mhm.
it followed me around. People were like, oh, I heard you're pretty good. And
Nice.
sometimes that's the key, is to don't overexpose yourself. Like, make sure you know what you're doing when you get that big opportunity. Kill that one opportunity. And don't necessarily go looking for like something the next night. Like, let the track breathe and see how you do.
Oh, interesting. Do you remember, was there a time you remember where you got props from like a well-known comedian or somebody that you looked up to?
Yeah, I remember Bob Saget, rest in peace. He
Mm.
had said that was some really good writing. And I said, thank you. He goes, no, really good. And that meant a lot to me. Like, he said it twice. He really wanted to make sure that I heard it. And that was when I got to LA. Way before that, when I was at Go Bananas in Cincinnati, I remember a gig I did, or a bit I did. And the headliner, I wish I could remember who it was, but he was walking by me, and he said, oh, that was really funny. And he quoted the joke to me. And I was just starting out. So to get the headliner to say this to you, that was really, those things stay with you. And I actually did a podcast
Mm.
recently with, there were 4 comedians who all left Procter Gamble. That sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's true. 4 of us all came out of there in the zeros.
Mhm.
And one of the first guy to leave, Greg Warren, he said that to me. He goes, and I didn't know this story, so it really touched me. He just said that, I know you were really torn about leaving, and I was at the club one night, and you were on stage, and the headliner, must have been a different guy. Hopefully, maybe it was the same guy. Maybe that would be cool too. He leaned over to Greg. He goes, "Oh, he's gonna leave. He's gonna go do comedy. I can see it." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that story. That's really cool
Oh,
to hear."
wow.
It's like 15 years, 20 years later. And he goes, "Yeah, I thought you would appreciate that. I never got a chance to tell you." So I think when you get people, I think your question is very insightful, because when you get the people who are doing it for a living telling you that what you're doing is good, and there's really nothing in it for them to tell you that, I think that is special. That does give you a
Yeah.
lot of
I
encouragement.
mean, I imagine it's confidence building. Was that the case for you, or you just kind of build your confidence from that you source out from somewhere else?
It's totally that. It comes down really to 2 people, and
Mhm.
my mom and my dad. Nope, sorry, it's not my parents. It's actually when I performed for Dave Chappelle, and I opened for him 5 times. We have a mutual friend who knows him much better than I do. I don't really know him. I've worked with him a few times. If I saw him, I'd say hello, but I don't really know him super well. But I remember my friend and I were hanging out all day. Then we sat down and he goes, "Oh, I do have to tell you something." And because I told Chappelle one of your jokes, and he goes, "Man, Rajiv is funny." And I go, "We've been hanging out all day and you're telling me," he goes, "I wanted to sit down and tell you face to face because I know what a big deal that is." He goes, "He really thinks you're funny." And I was like, wow, that is something I'm going to carry the rest of my life, that Dave Chappelle thinks I'm funny. And not just that one joke, but he goes, he thinks you're funny. And one night, a good acquaintance of mine, Eric Rivera, was at the Hollywood Laugh Factory, and Ava Longoria had come to see him perform. And she asked me for a picture. She's like, "You are hilarious." And I have the picture of me and Ava Longoria right up there on the wall. And, you got like this hot Latina celebrity at the top of her game, like Desperate Housewives moments, coming up to you to tell you're funny. If that doesn't like give you confidence, what is going to?
Man, that sounds like a great feeling. Rajiv, so I've been very I can't tell you like how excited I am to speak with you, because I've been wanting to speak with a comedian for this podcast. And it's just great to connect with you. And
we'll have to get you a real one at some point, but I'll be a stand-in for now.
Oh, come on. What other comedian has performed on all 7 continents? Right.
True.
By the way, just parentheses, I saw your video from Antarctica and I was very confused because you had facial hair and then you didn't, and then you did. How long does it take to go from clean shaven to like bushy beard for you? Like what happened there?
As short amount of time as it takes for an Indian to get an engineering degree. We just go through it, man. It's just like your friend with the 2 PhDs. We could just do it. I could grow a fairly respectable beard in like 10 days.
10 days? But why? Because it seemed like really good face coverage to be in Antarctica. So like, why did you shave it off? It seemed like really cold.
It's funny. It was cold, but the reason I did, and I shaved it while I was on the ship, is I was meeting a lot of these people for the first time, and I don't really wear a beard normally. So I thought, well, they can see me for who I really am. People are like, "Well, you look so different without a beard." I'm like, well, yeah, that's what beards do.
They look nice and it looked warm. I don't know. It looked like good coverage warm for the climate. Anyway,
it was warm. I don't like getting food stuck in it. It's too messy.
Oh yeah, that part is that cannot be so nice. But coming back to the question, and one of the reasons I've been wanting to speak with a comedian, because comedians are just super keen observers of human nature, right? And so I'm just curious, just to poke at your own experience. We only know our own experiences, right? But are there any lessons about human nature that you have learned along the way about how people tick, what makes people work? Is there anything else for you that you've noticed in the last 16 years or so that you've been?
People are stupid, but they're perceptive. And what I mean by that is I think the general public is quite dumb, but they can they still get it though. They still know what you mean. People generally have a fairly high EQ, at least for knowing where you're coming from and what you're trying to say. I think writ large, that is a massive problem in the country, and I'm very pessimistic about the future. But I think my own personal experience, especially after performing for largely white crowds in Ohio and Alabama and Kentucky and places like that, I was really well received. And I'm not saying all my shows are great, and I was always funny and all those things. No, not necessarily. But I think that they did receive me for who I was. And there's been a large examination now of people of color doing jokes about themselves to make white people laugh. And that's been kind of examined recently. I'm not sure what I entirely feel about that. I'm still processing it because it's a fairly new concept. I would say this, though, that I don't think that's what my jokes were. I think there was a dose of that, but I also think there were a lot of jokes about white people's perception of us, about our perception of them, if we have to us them it, which I don't like to do. But I think also I was just a guy talking. I was just somebody up there talking about my own experiences. And my act, I was talking about Chris Rock and how he segmented his into race and politics and sex. And mine was an Indian guy growing up in Ohio, but then it was a lot of just random observations and dating and all those things that were universal. And I think you do more to break down stereotypes if you follow the Aziz Ansari path, which is he's a guy who happens to be Indian. Russell Peters leans
Right.
really hard into being Indian, and he breaks down stereotypes or reinforces them or does whatever he does. And Russell's a really good friend of mine. Two
Mm-hmm.
approaches, but I think one that is very effective for getting people to just be like, oh, that's a person just like me, is not really addressing it. Like, yeah, of course I know who AC/DC is. Of course I know what potato salad is. Like, of course, I know what white people listen to and what they eat. And I grew up in Ohio, and I like AC/DC and I love potato salad. So it's not I think that there is a lot that, like, we are ambassadors, and there's been a running away of that recently. And I don't think there should be, because in America, everybody's an ambassador. That's just what you are
Mm-hmm.
when you come here. And I don't think people should always just interview you about your own experience. I'm very careful with that, about the references I make when I'm with people who are different from me, especially if they're Black or Latino or whatever. I don't want to just lean into like, yeah, I love Bad Bunny or I love Kanye West. Like, come on, dude. Like, seriously, like, that's ridiculous. That's so obviously, like, you're trying so hard or you're being racist or racial or whatever. But I think that you need to be yourself. And I think that you
Mm-hmm.
need to just come out and not be offended if people ask you, like, where's good Indian food here? Like, that's a pretty normal question to ask an Indian person in LA. And the answer here is there isn't any. But I think for the most part, I don't think we should be offended by stuff like that. I think that's why we're here, is that I think diversity is beautiful. And I think talking about this stuff is healthy. I'm not so sure I even really believe in cultural appropriation. I think that there's celebrating a culture and then there's mocking a culture. And I think as long as you're trying to celebrate it, I don't think it's even bad if white people wear a sari or a sombrero. I don't subscribe to that's like necessarily a bad thing. And I think in this day and age, people are really offended if you say that, but I'm kind of like, why? Like, why? When my wife and I were shopping for cowboy outfits in Austin, there were a couple things that we were trying on and we were kind of laughing. And there were a couple of white folks there that work at the store. They were a little hurt by the fact that we were laughing at it. Guess what? Everybody gets hurt by that. Anyone who's getting laughed at for, like, if you're wearing a little drawstring or whatever, there's a woman there's like, don't wear that because it looks too touristy. Like, the shirt on you looks good. You need to just be you, but you're wearing a cowboy hat. Like, you don't need to change your whole life around. And I was thinking through that, like, everybody gets hurt by that. If you're laughing at them, if you're mocking them, white people are not immune to that. Men are not immune to that. Straight people are not immune to that. It's all a question of if you're inhabiting it and celebrating it. I think that's a good thing. I don't know where your question started, but anyway, that's what I think.
It kind of went like on a tangent, but it's all good because we're just unpacking your experience. Did you watch like the original Star Wars movies back in the day? I grew up and I was just reflecting about it. I'm going to bring it back, okay?
Sure. Well, hey, I don't know if I brought it back, so go wherever you need to go.
I would take a detour, but I'm going to bring it back. I was reflecting not too long ago on that first Star Wars movie. I was little, right? I think I'm a year behind you. I'm 77, so you're 76,
I'm 76.
Right? Yeah. And there was like Princess Leia, who's just badass. She like takes over her own rescue and she's awesome, right? And I think there's just that power of just showing something instead of saying like, oh, this is pointing on something and making it kind of artificial and making a point out of it versus there's just this person that's badass or that's funny or whatever the quality of the person is. And I think that's where some diversity things kind of go in the wrong direction with good intentions, but it ends up going in the wrong direction, right? Because they kind of make a point, oh, this is the identity X that's going to occupy this position. And I just don't know that calling attention to that in those ways is that useful versus like, just go be funny or be amazing at whatever it is that you want to be, right? And express yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're kind of converging there.
I think
in some way.
No, I think the through line there is whether you're being mean-spirited or good-natured. And that's really what it is, right? If people get the sense, and this is kind of what I meant by whether people are perceptive or not, they can generally sense, that brings it back. What you said is the bridge here. It's because people get the sense that you're being mean-spirited, they're not going to laugh, hopefully. Or if they are, that's really honestly the wrong kind of audience. But if they get the sense that you're being good-natured, they will laugh. They'll open up and their hearts will be open, their minds will be open. And I think that is really what it is. And in that way, I would say that I have largely been impressed that people have gotten my jokes. Chris Rock said that your jokes are not smart if only smart people get them. And that has stayed with me for a very long time. So I think that making it accessible to people, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So building on this, like pulling on another thread, I was curious to just get your take on What does comedy do for people? Right? Like people, so you were just sharing before that people remember you 12 years later for like 30 minutes or however long you were in stage doing your bit. Yeah, what do you think that comedy does for people? Like, what does it move inside people? What's your take on that?
Comedy opens people up. It does. It opens their
Mhm.
heart. It opens their minds. It opens their souls, because when you're laughing, you're open. And that's when you share a laugh with somebody, it is a shared experience. I mean, it sounds kind of dumb when you share a laugh, it's a shared experience, but it is. It's something where your souls are connecting. You know, I think it was in those Linklater movies, Before Sunrise or Before Sunset, one of them, where I think he said something about like, if I believe in a God, it's the space between two people, right? That space between two people. And that's what I always said was so difficult about the pandemic, was even right now when we're speaking, it is inorganic for me to look into the camera instead of you. I'm listening, I'm looking at you while I'm listening, and I look at the camera while I'm talking. But no matter what, we cannot look each other in the eye. So it's not only that we can't just touch each other during the pandemic, but also we cannot look each other in the eye. And the eyes are really the windows of the soul. What does that mean? It means that they're open in a way that no other part of your body is. You're talking to someone's mouth, you talk into their eyes, you look into their eyes, and your eyes can look and see. And that is the connection that you have. And so when you don't have that, you can't get that power of looking each other in the eye. We all lost something for 2 years, because that is energy that we get from people. And it is the same thing of like when you look people in the eye when you're on stage, they will laugh more if you're looking at them, right? You're not supposed to look at a sea of people. It's one of the first things I heard in stand-up comedy was make that guy guffaw, make that girl over there chortle. Like that's the idea. You're supposed to like look and go, I'm going to make that person laugh. And then you guys always have that. I think that's the positive. The negative is people don't like being laughed at. I was just saying this, that we were watching some documentary about the riots in Brooklyn in the 60s. And they were talking about how Black folks had moved into an Italian neighborhood, and the Italian folks felt like the Black kids were on the corner laughing at them in their own neighborhood. I'm not justifying race, blah, 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 all these things, but it's very powerful in a negative way to be laughed at. People don't like to be laughed at. They don't like to be on the outside of a joke. And that's why one of the most powerful quotes is something like, when my brothers draw a circle to exclude me, I draw a larger circle to include them. And that's the idea with laughter, is you're supposed to hopefully laugh it off. And it's hard. I have to remind myself every day of this. Like when I stub my toe or I miss the left turn or whatever it is, if that happened to a guy on screen in a movie, you would laugh. And you have to just see yourself in that movie and laugh at that and remain open, because as long as you're open and understanding and trying to include people in that joke, it can be a very powerful thing. It could be a blade and a weapon the other way, but it can be a very powerful healing tool when used right.
Yeah. Okay, Rajiv, we're going to swim to the deep end of the pool now. You're going to join me there?
Here we go. Let's swim. I'm a good swimmer.
Okay, here we go. So I've heard you say multiple times, right, in doing research for this, I've heard you quote, I should say, Jerry Seinfeld about how comedy is a journey into oneself. And I think I saw that documentary where this comes from. I think it's on Netflix. It's Comedian, right? It's the name of the documentary. I just really don't remember it. So I'll probably go back and look and rewatch it at some point. Sure. But I'm curious, like since you've quoted that, it means something to you. I'm curious, what has that journey been like for you? Like, what have you discovered about yourself in this comedy journey of yours?
There's some quote about introspection that it's something like the more you do, the more lost you get. And the sadness of introspection is you can do so much of it and miss stuff that is so obvious, right? Aristotle said, apparently, or wrote, the eye cannot see itself. So we're just talking about how important eyes are. But it's, what am I missing? What was so obvious? How did I not see that? And the other day I was on a plane and I received such a high compliment. There was a woman sitting next to me, and she was a larger woman, a woman of color. And at the end of the flight, she said, I have to say that you are one of the most empathetic and self-aware people I've ever sat next to. And I was really kind of taken aback because we didn't interact really all that much. And I was like, thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. And then I sort of caught up with her as we were leaving. So we sort of fell into step. I go, if you're comfortable sharing, well, what made you say that? Like, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. And she just said, you were very aware of everything you were doing. Like, if you open something or close something, or when my like plug fell out, you put it back in, and like I didn't do anything crazy. I didn't like carry her bags. I didn't do anything like that. I'm very small, so I can't really carry bags. But it was also like this, it's the highest compliment I can receive. It's like you're self-aware, because to me, I think that's a really important thing. And I'm sure there are many times where I'm not. I'm sure there was a time, this still stays with me. I was in a parking lot, a grocery parking lot, and I was loading all my groceries into the car. And as I like moved the cart and like got into the car, this woman gets out. She was probably a middle-aged white woman. And she said in my direction, she just goes, "Jerk." And she like walks into the store. And it took me like, I think I figured out that maybe I didn't realize she was trying to get out of her car. And here I was like loading all of my groceries and just blocked her in, but I didn't know. And it really hurt. It still hurts to think about it. Like, gosh, I mean, that was really not nice of her to say, but was I also that out to lunch that I like blocked someone in their car? And it was an innocent mistake. But I think those are the things that really stay with us, whether they're compliments or insults or something someone said to you. I think that when you're on stage, people have seen me change over the years, whether, okay, you've gotten better at it or what have you. But what I talk about, I guess, and what I confess and what I'm able to sort of, but what have I discovered about myself through comedy, which was your question? Speaking of being self-aware, not having any idea what your question was, I guess I'm a little stuck, because I think what I've learned about myself is that something I knew before I went into stand-up is that I'm funny. Like, I know that I'm funny, and Hollywood can really beat you down. Like, I've had a lot of success on my own independently, but I've had very little success in the industry, very little. And I knew when I got out here that it's very hard. And I told myself, I'm like, don't ever let them take that away from you. Like, you're a funny guy. And if you turn out to not be that great at stand-up, maybe you're not that great of a stand-up. And maybe, because that's a skill. Being funny is a talent. That's innate. It's congenital. It's inborn. Being good at stand-up comedy is a skill. You can get better at it or what have you. And I'm not sure. I think I still feel like I need a few more achievements before I'd go, yeah, I'm really good at stand-up comedy. Because those are that you do need some external validation. People say it's all internal. It's not. You do need some external validation from the gatekeepers. But I have held on to the fact that same voice is still there, that I still think I'm funny. And I actually went through a thing a couple of years ago where I was like observing myself in company, like off stage. Am I still funny? Like, am I still funny with people? And I was still making people laugh really hard in real life. And I was like, okay, that's good. That's good. You're not just like this guy who performs on stage and not funny off stage. Like, you're still you. But I think I have a hard time answering your question sometimes, because I think that is what has held me back, is that I haven't figured out that package and how to merchandise it. Gary Vee talks about that, the entrepreneur, that he said at Summit out here, he said on stage that a lot of you are successful, but what's holding you back is you haven't figured out that container and how to merchandise that container. Like, how do you package yourself? And I think with such a long answer to your question, that's pretty obvious. I'm not totally sure.
Okay. It's all good. Hey, listen, life is just a journey of self-discovery. Yeah. And not just that, but hopefully also self-expression and relationships and so forth.
Yeah.
Rajiv, so the name of this project is Making Business Art. Just wondering what bubbles up for you when you hear that phrase, whatever's there for you.
Making business art. The first thing that comes to mind is Dave Chappelle, when he talked about how entertainment was the meeting of commerce and art. So that kind of conjures that up for me when he said that that's really ultimately what entertainment is. You're trying to make money from self-expression. Making business art, I feel like to some extent also means that you're taking business, right? And you're trying to make that into some kind of art form. You're trying to find the elegance of business, whether it's marketing or sales or accounting or finance. I don't know how elegant accounting can be. I did get somewhat of an MBA, at least a few of the classes in. But the idea of it is an art and a science, and so is marketing and so many of those things. So maybe it's this idea of trying to find the artistic and self-expression side of commerce and business.
Yeah, no, it's whatever is true for you. No, thank you. For me, this is partially, so this whole podcast is a project, it's an exploration, right? And I get to speak with people like you.
Sure.
And there's something there about moving people emotionally, like emotional design and connecting with people emotionally, which comedians are excellent at, right? And as you were saying before, it opens up people. Like if you can get somebody to laugh, you can get away with, right? Or you can like make a sale, or you can connect with people in a special way, and then people remember you 12 years later, right? Just from spending a little bit of time with you. So thank you for sharing that. So now digging into this concept of making business art, I wanted to touch on a few questions about creative process, and then we can jump into a lightning round and wind down our conversation. So regarding creative process, I'm just curious again about your perspective and experience about what has to be true, or what are the conditions for comedians to create and then deliver material that really connects with people. I mean, what have you noticed? What have you learned about that in your career so far?
Louis C.K. talked about how comedians' biggest fear isn't bombing, it's being boring. Getting up on stage and losing the crowd and people just kind of checking their watches and their phones and disengaging. And I think, though, powering through that and living in that discomfort and realizing that a lot of time in brainstorming, whether it's business or creative, a bad idea can lead to a good idea, and remaining open to that and just really vulnerable. I think that is the gold. That's the stuff that on the other side, what does Brene Brown say? That on the other side of vulnerability is everything you want, or on the other side of fear is everything you want. And I think it is that of standing there, you do feel naked and you just are kind of going, okay, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to stick to my guns. Because the issue that happens for a lot of us is our ego takes over and we want laughs. And we chase that laugh to make ourselves feel good. Because when you go in with a scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality, sometimes you got this mentality that I'm going to go get laughs tonight. You're being kind of selfish. Like, I'm going to go get laughs. Let's go get some laughs tonight. But other times I'm going to go give laughs. And if you go in with that open mentality, it doesn't mean you're always going to do well. You can go in with a good mentality, good positivity. You just didn't have it that night, or they weren't feeling you, whatever it is. But I think the great stuff that I've seen people do is really that really vulnerable stuff that they feel only they do, and they have the guts to share it. And I think that's the truly great stuff. I think that stuff that everybody does, yeah, okay, that's cool. But if you're like, I don't know if anyone else does this, and you have the gut, or anyone else thinks this, or I'm going to just be daring and I'm going to say this, not to be provocative and shock people, but to make that connection. I think that's what it is. If you're really trying to make that connection, you've got Yoda over there, I think, right in the background. And so
we're learning to use the Force together. Yeah.
To learn to use the Force. You mentioned Star Wars. Like, I'm short like Yoda, but the one thing I will say is that Yoda's wrong. Do or do not, there's no try. No, there's only try, man. There is only try. That's the whole thing in self-improvement, in a relationship, in comedy. And there's a quote that's like, you can't look cool and get better at the same time. And that's really what it is. If you're up there just trying to look cool and get laughs and be awesome, you're going to get to a certain level. But if you're up there, like I've seen people stick to their guns, like, oh my God, they're having a bad set. But you see it like, oh, okay, if they stick with that, she's going to get that to sing. That's going to be really good in about 3 or 4 months.
Wow. So part of what I do is help leaders and teams with innovation strategy and do design thinking and things like that. So part of that is trying to give permission for people to have failure, but human beings, we're all terrified of failure.
Sure.
And one of the things I find fascinating about comedians is that you all write in public, right? You write by yourself, but then ultimately you're writing in public, you're bombing. I think that has an extra layer of brutality in that not only do you fail, but then there's just social rejection, which again, humans detest because you're being heckled, or just the silence, as you said, like that's gut-wrenching for most people. But your kind, you just kind of transform that into funny stuff after a number of reps. So just following on what you were just sharing, do you have any thoughts or any reflections around how comedians deal with that failure of you write in public, you bomb, and then you just refine that material, you kind of transcend that and refine material and end up with funny things on the other side of that? What What are your thoughts about that?
It's all failure, right? I mean, it's so much of it is just getting there. And I think for me, the challenge a lot of times is I can write the stuff so that it's 80% ready. And Ricky Gervais talked about this, where this is where I fall down a little bit. I'll just be vulnerable with you here and just say that a lot of time that 80 for 20, being an excellentist around the 95%, it's that gold where you really get to that 96, 97% and doing Six Sigma and all the things where you go, the 99.999 was much more 10 times better than 99.9. Like you learn all the stuff and it just math and makes sense. But you just kind of go, am I going to put in the work? Am I going to put in the reps? Like you said, good way of putting it, to get it from 80 to 95. So it's really strong, right? 100 is subjective. It's art. I mean, who knows if it's 100, but if you're getting like, whoa, that is really great stuff. Are you willing to put in that get it from very good to great? That's one skill set. The other skill set is what you're saying is like taking it from no laughs, taking it from 0 to 60 or 0 to 80 or whatever it is. That is tough because you really have to have the conviction that what you're saying is really funny. And I've had those jokes. I've had jokes that I'm like, this is so funny. What is wrong? And I will do that joke and I will do the reps. And sometimes I'll get it to sing. I'll get it to work. Other times, it's just me on that one, man. It's just me on that one. Like I guess that's just something I find funny. And that the voice of my head and I are just going to have to enjoy that. That's us. We're going to keep that like the deer in Stand By Me, where he tells no one else about it. And that's his own little thing. And it's like, okay, you know what? Maybe that's God's gift to you, is like, that is your kind of humor, your kind of joke. Nobody else really finds it funny. And you have to find the beauty in that. As far as dealing with that failure and getting up there again, it is hard, especially when you've had a bad set. I think that there's a difference between, I had a bit that I really wanted to work, but overall I had a good set, but because you usually get up there with one joke that you really want to tell. You're like, okay, tonight, this is like, I've got 45 minutes to do, but there's a couple jokes here I want to really try or they're new or whatever. And I just want to tell them. And if those don't work, you're left with that feeling of like, yeah, but that's kind of like the one I wanted. And there's a difference between that and then you bomb. Right? Like you have a bad set. And I think that there are times where you go, okay, well, this material has worked in other settings and whatever else. And sometimes it's you were off. You have to just be very honest with yourself. You just weren't quite as sharp. You tripped over a couple of words. You just didn't have it. And that happens all the time. I watch a lot of sports. And sometimes it's amazing how, dude, the guy just can't hit a first serve. That person just can't kick the ball. The person just can't throw the pitch. You're like, why? I don't know. Some nights they just don't have it. And other times where it's them, they just sucked. They were a crappy audience. And there are other times where it's an X factor. It's just like, you guys just didn't line up. It's sometimes hard to just say, oh, what's that person like? Well, the person is how I perceive the person to be. Maybe that guy's great, but he and I just don't really get along. But I don't think he's a piece of crap. We just don't speak the same language. And that's probably the most mature way a lot of time of talking about people. I mean, some people are just pieces of crap, but I think that there's just that idea of like, I can't really assess it. And the audience is great and you're great, but you guys just are not lining up. And so it was not a good set. It didn't work. In fact, it was bad. Versus going, I have this new thing, and it's just not working. How am I going to get it to work? I think you have to just keep trying and tell yourself that it'll be on the other side of that. But if it's not, hopefully you have enough other stuff that it doesn't break your confidence. Because I think what I'm going through is like what I was saying Hassan was doing, which was the stuff he was ranting about in the apartment and the stuff he was talking about on stage were two entirely different things. People say that to me all the time. They're like, you are so interested in politics and all of that stuff, philosophy, but you don't do it on stage. And I go, because it's not that funny. I don't think it's that funny. Like, I think it's really serious stuff. And they're like, no, but when you write it, like I read your stuff and it's pretty funny. I go, it's writing funny. It's not, you need to be an artiste to really, you got to be Bill Burr. You got to be Dave Chappelle to do that. And they're like, don't you think you could be? And I'm like, no, I don't think that. I don't think that. I think that I'm really good, but I don't think I'm one of the greats. And I think that you have to have that self-awareness. If I had that kind of maybe stage time and maybe I was established like that, and maybe I'm willing to take all these risks, then I don't know. I also do a lot of corporate work and these sorts of podcasts. If I get up there and talk about a lot of very alienating stuff, that's a choice that I'm going in a very different direction. And it's almost like a rebirth.
So just to look at that question from just one more angle before moving on, I'm also wondering, then what gets in the way? Like what makes just material be meh or fall flat? Like what gets in the way of the artist in creating and delivering good material that connects with people?
Well, the simple answer is it's either the material or the delivery, right? Either what you wrote wasn't that funny or you didn't find a way to make it funny. Because they say that there's a slight distinction that comics say funny things and comedians say things funny. And it's interesting. It doesn't matter which one's a comic, which one's a comedian, all that stuff. But there are people we know like that. There are people we know in real life that parties are hilarious. They couldn't do stand-up comedy, but oh my gosh, I don't even know what that guy's saying is funny, but he's just so funny the way he says it. He's just so funny. And there are other comics who just stand on stage and just tell jokes. They don't really put any oomph into it. It's just, wow, what they wrote, that was really strong. And so if you're the kind of comedian who just stands there and tells a joke, but then you know what it's just, that's the kind of material you do. And it just, the material is missing. Other times the people who can perform it, they have kind of two modes. They have kind of two levers they can pull. Either they have to rewrite it or they have to just deliver it differently. And I think that's what you just work on. Like if a joke just misses, what's that thing? Well, it just didn't connect. It just didn't have there are two types of reactions that are bad. One is silence and one is a boo or a hiss, or like they walk out or they're angry or they slap you. There's the idea of just like, at least that second one is a reaction, right? At least you got something out of them. Whereas silence means that they just didn't understand what you were saying.
Wow. I mean, you were just saying a little while ago too about that distinction of getting and giving laughs. And you mentioned something about ego. Are there ways that you see ego getting in the way of an artist just kind of being in the right place to create and deliver material in a way that connects with people?
Do I see ego standing in that way, or like an example of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's if that's something that you've observed or you have any thoughts about.
I mean, I think that ego is such an interesting topic. I've been exploring it for a long time without a real way to attack it, because there's an inverse nature to it in a way that isn't for other things. Like they say that those who know say, and those who those who say don't know, and those who know don't say. And so there's very Zen, very meditation, like the people who just know it, they feel it. And so if I say to you, like, I'm very confident, what's the first thing you think? I don't think this guy's very confident. He wouldn't have said he's very confident, because why is he saying that? He would just be confident, right? And so I remember talking to my therapist about this, where I read a book called The Game, and it was all about picking up women, and it was this really despicable book. But there's a part of it where he talks about, he's a very good writer though, Neil Strauss, how a rich man doesn't have to tell you he's rich. And I thought of that for a long time, and I said that to my therapist, and she goes, have you ever met a rich man who didn't tell you he was rich? And I was like, oh, well, maybe not with words. She goes, yeah, not with words, but with the watch or with the car or with the house, or where they said they vacation. She goes, they always get it in there. They always get it in there. And I'm like, that's interesting. I mean, there are people who flaunt it more than other people do, for sure. There's a difference in cultures and personalities. But I think that the idea of, you need a certain amount of audacity to get on stage, right? Why would these 300 people listen to you for an hour? Why are they there to listen to you? Like, you obviously think you're pretty special to sell the tickets, all the stuff and whatever, and like now say something. That takes some balls, man. Like, you must really think that you're a pretty cool guy. On the other hand, there's this neediness. People don't think of comedians as super confident. They think of them as insecure and screwed up and needy. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm not that successful, is because I kind of have a good life off stage. Like, I'm married with a child and I have a house and I'm fairly well socially adjusted and I can make people laugh in real life. So I don't need the stage the way a lot of performers do. And the people who, my friends who've like really done really well, I go, oh, okay, they need that. They need to get on stage. They need the world to give them that validation, because maybe they didn't get it from their dad, or they didn't get it from their dad. It's always their dad. And so or their mom or something else, right? But I think when you were the class clown and you were class president and you were just constantly validated, you don't need the stage as much. And so that is going to be a hindrance for you. Like, it's going to be something that somebody told me that a long time ago. They're like, I just don't think you're screwed up enough. He goes, you're weird. Don't get me wrong. You're a weird guy. But he goes, you are screwed up in certain ways. But he's like, I don't think you're like that level of screwed up, to be that level of successful. And I was like, that's pretty good watch out. A lot of that has to do with ego.
Okay. So
He's like, okay,
no, I'm just watching time here. So just making sure that
sure.
we wrap up on time, and I still have some questions to go here.
All good.
Let's jump into FCIT. And are you still running Standpoint? Is that project still ongoing, or?
Standpoint Agency has lain dormant for a long time. It is still
Okay.
technically there. I was speaking about it with a few people earlier this year to relaunch it, which I really want to do.
Yeah.
It is still technically available.
Got that. But so let's talk about FCIT. What is it, and what's the thought behind it to help, organizations and leaders and teams make something out of that?
FCIT stands for funny because it's true, and it encapsulates a lot of the conversation we've had so far, which is, why does a joke work? Because it lands and it resonates and people connect with it. And so when people laugh at something, it's funny because it's true. The idea is to help businesses generate insights, right? And insights are those little nuggets that are so true about consumer behavior. And when you find an insight about consumer behavior, you can build a marketing program around it. You can build a campaign around it. And that's why those things are so important, and they're very hard to find, and they're hard to put a certain way. And the other day I heard corporate culture defined as the way we do things around here. And I was like, that's what you pay someone a lot of money to put it just that way, that turn of phrase, that, yep, everybody knows what you mean. And that's what we can do. We hire comedians, established comedians, to come in and listen to your brand team, do some research, perform either for your brand team or for the consumers in a comedy club with drinks, and see what resonates, see what lands, see what makes people laugh, and then peel back that onion, ask them questions, ask the magician, how did you pull the rabbit out of the hat? Power dot, brainstorm, and come up with a concept. And, one that we did became the basis for the global restage for Herbal Essences, which is a $50 million campaign. So we should have charged a lot more money. But these insights are really handy, and we feel like we have a good way of uncovering them.
That's very interesting. I'd love to talk to you about that offline and just maybe explore if there's some creative collaboration there.
Love to.
But before we jump into lightning round, I'm just curious to ask, if looking back at your corporate years, and what are your thoughts being a comedian and entertainer and creative, living a creative life? What are your thoughts of how can, leaders, teams, it's called corporate cultures, just make work more creative, enjoyable, and meaningful? Do you have any thoughts around that? Or maybe you don't, and that's fine too.
Could you ask the question one more time?
Sure. How can, if you think back about your P&G days, your Pige days, now being a seasoned entertainer and comedian, like, what are ways you think that your teams could have just made more work more creative and more enjoyable and just more meaningful?
I think I start all of my meetings, even to this day, with three things. How long do you have? Where do you want to be at the end of this meeting? And how are you feeling? Let me take your temperature, right? And I think having people just air something in the beginning, professional and personal, is cool, right? Like, how are you feeling about this project? But how are you doing? Right? Like, just, you're a person. Like, how's it going? You don't need to take 15 minutes to answer the question, but just like give me a thing. Oh yeah, my son lost his soccer match yesterday. It was a little tough. Okay, cool. Like, I'm sorry that happened, but because people carry that stuff with them, whether subconsciously or consciously. And I feel like P&G did a pretty good job of that. I think that we did speak to each other as people. I also feel that you should brainstorm when you're closest to the consumer. And what I mean by that is, before brand teams load you up with all the onboarding, they should ask your questions at that moment before you know anything. Like, if you were to take a job about headphones, I would want you to go ahead and just write all your recommendations without doing any research, just based on your own personal, your thought, because that's what I'm saying. It's the same thing with comedy. It's the stuff that you think maybe I know, but now I got to go do research and look at the percentages and the focus group. Yeah, do that. I'm not saying that stuff is useless, but you're going to lose all those things that made you, and you're going to forget what you thought of headphones. And what you thought of headphones before you took the job is closest to what the consumer thinks before you do all that other stuff.
Yeah. So it's like a self-study of how do you as a person consume or use something, right, in day-to-day life.
How do you interact with it? What's your impression of it?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Rajiv, I know that we are tight on time here. So we're going to start to wind down our conversation. So we're going to transition to our lightning round. Got a few questions. Some of them are a little silly, but
Sure.
feel free
Now
to
I
pass.
finally give you short answers.
Feel free to pass, but I do invite you to play.
Okay.
All right. First question is, can you describe your closet and what state it's in?
My closet is very organized by color and by the heaviness of the garment. And it is generally in pretty good shape.
Well, so the heaviness, there's like the engineering element there, right? Like the weight.
If I have a winter coat, that's all on the right. The lighter t-shirts are all on the left, and then it's color organized within that.
Very nice. Next question is, what's the last piece of media that you loved? And that can be book, movies, podcasts, articles, anything.
The last piece of media that I loved. I listened to Olivia Rodrigo's album. I really like it.
Okay. Awesome. What is something that inspires you?
I live in awe of the human spirit. Comedians are not supposed to say that, but I cannot believe that people endure the hardships they do and go on. It is mind-blowing to me what people survive. And I see that every day, and it brings a tear to my eye.
Wow, it's very thoughtful. What's a song or band that you must play during a road trip?
The Beatles.
Beatles? Any particular song? Any favorite? No.
I love Strawberry Fields Forever. I don't know if I have to hear it on every road trip, but I would say Abbey Road as an album is way up there. Led Zeppelin is my number 2. So excellent. I love that stuff.
Classic rock. Awesome.
Classic rock.
Our last question is, what do you want to see more of in the world?
Understanding. I think that's the thing that we all too many times seek to understand instead of be understood. Like Stephen Covey had talked about, maybe the second habit. And love and peace are great and they're important, but I think just trying to understand what people are saying, that ties in a lot of what we talked about: connecting, listening, being open, laughing, not being offended. All the things, I think, flows from understanding.
Okay. Well, thank you. So we reached the end of our time together. I just want to open up the floor for you to share what do you have going on and where can people find you?
Well, thanks for compacting it in my schedule. I do appreciate that, Ezekiel. That means a lot to me, and I wish we had even more time. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Your questions are very insightful, and you've obviously done a lot of research, so I super appreciate it. People can follow me at Funny Indian, really anywhere on social media, especially Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, everywhere else. So please follow me. I do send out a monthly Substack, so you are welcome to email me as well, Rajiv, RAJIV, at funnyindian.com. I have a number of projects out, and I'd love for you to consume them and make that your favorite last piece of media that you consume.
And I do have to shout out your YouTube channel. I love what do you bring to the table. Great interviews. They're really engaging. I loved your interview with Hassan, and I watched a few others. So I definitely recommend check out Rajiv on YouTube as well. And your website again is?
Thank you very much for that. At Funny Indian, or just funnyindian.com.
That's right. And your show is also available.
Yeah, actually the show has its own website at watchrajiv.com.
There you go.
Just the word watch and then my name, RAJIV.com. Yeah. But it also can redirect to the YouTube channel that has all the episodes.
Excellent. And did you say that season 2 of
Yep,
it's out.
It's out right now. Excellent. Yeah, we're releasing it episode by episode. So this is season 2.
Yeah, I need to check that out. Rajiv, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on Making Business Art, and hopefully maybe we can chat again.
I love it. Thank you. And I love how it stands. MBA, Making Business Art. I know you did that.
That's right. It's the other MBA.
The other MBA. Very well
Rajiv,
done.
Bless you.
Thank you.
And good journeys ahead.